One of the most fascinating things that I see in my city on a daily basis is our auto drivers talking to 5 different people in 5 different languages, all in a single day. This is largely happening because of the fact that there are so many people from different parts of the state and the nation coming into these cities, always migrating to these cities. If we think of ourselves, we might not be first generation or second generation urban migrants, but at the end of the day, we're all some form of urban migrants. I have 3 friends in the audience today who are from 3 different places, who talk 3 different languages. And this is the degree of diversity that we're talking about when we talk about cities. As an architecture student, for my undergrad, in our final semester of my thesis, we were asked to question ourselves, question what actually binds us to the profession. And many of my batchmates found it really easy to connect back to their roots, understand where they're actually from, their connections to their homelands, and therefore their projects were also situated in these places. But for me and a couple of others, this connection wasn't as easy, and there was a very evident disconnect. So when I'm talking about memory of a homeland, and especially in a city, as much as it's important for me to have that longing to understand where I'm from or where my parents are from, it becomes equally important for me to be rooted in the city that I'm from right now. And in the book, Place and Placelessness by Edward Ralph, he talks about this particular thing. He says the person feels very connected to a place when they identify with it. Therefore, a human memory and their identities are very interlinked. He talks about the place and its identity as, he just defines it as the recurring sameness with which a person or a group of people identify with that place. And there are 3 particular things that characterize the identity of a place in itself. One being the physical setting that these memories are placed in. 2, the situations and the events that occur in these places which give it the identity. For example, the Yakshagana from Mangaluru. And then the 3rd being the collective as well as the individual memories that a group of people form around these places. Now, if you think back to your earliest memories of childhood, let's say the first time ever you rode a bicycle, or the first time the first ever tooth came out of your mouth. These are all shared experiences, right? But at the end of the day, your memory will differ from mine, largely because of the physical setting that these memories are placed in. This sort of led me to question what actually happens to these memories in the event of a person being removed from their common understanding of a place. That is, if I'm removed from my homeland, what actually happens to my memories? Especially if I'm a child being removed from these environments, then what happens to my memories that have not even been formed yet? As of June 2021, the United Nations recorded a whopping 82.4 million people under the status of seeking refuge. These happen due to either natural calamities, they could even be voluntary migrations, or forced migrations. And forced migrations were accounting for the largest amount of the cause for which these migrations were occurring. Now, forced migrations could be due to a war or even a socio-political conflict. And for me or you who is not directly involved in these situations, and we are at this point an outsider, it becomes sort of easy to think that all's well as long as these people are housed in a new place. Oftentimes, this is not the condition. Oftentimes, these people feel very out of place, they feel very disconnected to the new places that they're placed in, and therefore these refugees feel this disconnect to the place that they're actually residing in at the moment. One such situation was the civil war of Sri Lanka. Now, even before I go there, there is a clear connect between somebody's memory and my memory. And for me to be able to understand the background or the environment, or maybe even the baggage with which I'm residing in a new city, I need to be able to put myself in your shoes, which is why a critical understanding of an event like a genocide becomes important. Especially when genocides occur, the concept or the rigid structural conditioning of the society behind these events are unknown, and they're oftentimes not even spoken of, largely because there might be political motivations behind it. There might be topics of conversation that are not something that is allowed to be spoken in a public setting. But at large, you can also see that there are many national as well as international organizations which are catering to this need. There are refugee camps, there are vast extending refugee camps for settling these people in their new lands, which is also called a host land. Or there might be efforts for repatriation as well. That is voluntary repatriation, where you help these people to go back to the places that they're from. But if I think about somebody who's trying to form an association or a close bond with the places that they now reside in, I don't think that their first thought could be to actually get a shelter above their roofs, right? So above their heads, right? But also at the end of the day, they want to feel like they belong to the place. This is a similar situation that took place after the civil war of Sri Lanka, where many emigrated to their neighboring countries or even faraway countries, all in the hope of seeking refuge. You can see that when people actually move to new places, the critical memory of the citizens who are already residing there is what becomes the most important, because that is what forms a common understanding where they can have a shared conversation. Many of these events happen under situations where the person involved in these situations are not able to get out of them. And I felt like it was important to actually start that conversation on what could be done to socially come together as a community to solve such issues. Now, many of these people moving to new cities or new places in the hope of finding refuge are commonly put in a city environment, and these city environments might be places where they feel the most uncomfortable in. Therefore, it becomes really important for us to situate these topics in a very urban setting. Therefore, the project was actually placed in the center of Chennai, which was a home to the largest number of the immigrating refugees, and therefore it helps in the easement of this understanding into the everyday consciousness of people. According to René Dubos, human diversity makes tolerance more than a virtue. It makes it a requirement for survival. And especially with cities like ours, where every person who is residing in a city is from a different background, speaks a different tongue, and has a different notion of identity, it becomes extremely important to have conversations of tolerance. Many conditions of genocides across the world are something that occur as events. Now, these events have a lot of commonalities as they go forth. There might be conditions where something that has already occurred in the past, for example, if a Syrian refugee has been made to lose their home and move out of their homeland, a similar condition is occurring somewhere else. And for us as a society to be able to understand what these structural conditions of those events are, it becomes important to understand them, and therefore research forms the basis of our understanding. Now, during any ethnic cleansing, it almost becomes a meaningless act wherein a group of people try to remove or erase the ethnic existence of another group of people. It almost is a form of devoid and a meaningless act in such. This rigid structural thought process that some people get affected by actually leads to marginalization. And when a group of people or a community is marginalized and put to the outskirts of a community, it leads to a voided condition in society. This voided condition in the northern parts of Sri Lanka can be seen in physical forms as these bunkers. Now, these bunkers were the places where people took refuge during aerial bombings. Many of the situations were under siege. There were people who were the Tamilians in the northern parts of Sri Lanka trying to escape this war, but weren't really let out of sight. And therefore, the project was an abstraction of the two vast polarities of the story. One being the war bunkers, which is an idea of the dissociation, the discomfort, as well as the disjunction that these people actually went through. But at the same time, it also speaks of the forests of Vanni in Kilinochchi. In northern Sri Lanka, these forests formed the place of hope for these citizens. Citizens who are now no more wanted by this country. The project then became an understanding of four main components of importance. One being recollection. Recollection in the form of a museum. It becomes important for us to remember these events because when you see something like a statue or maybe even a small emblem in a public setting such as maybe even a city junction or like a signal, it reminds us of an event that has already occurred. And this remembrance is important for us to start having those conversations. It becomes just the starting point for any of these conversations to be had. And then there is also the second one, which is prevention in the form of a research center in itself. The third being remembrance, and the fourth being an urban landscape where these conversations could be had on a daily basis. Now the project also talks about a combination of memorial aspect of the project, which is nothing but the museum, and then you have the research center. Now if you think about museums, the last thing that I actually remember about a museum was me going to one of these as a school excursion or visiting a new place with my parents where I could go and see these museums for once in a time and then never go back to these places ever again. Similarly, if you're a citizen who has this museum in that same city, it's not like we've ever gone to these places voluntarily. Secondly, a research center becomes a place where a lot of these information is collected, it's harbored, but not much of it is actually used for a societal understanding. Therefore, these building typologies, which is the museum as well as research center, sort of become obsolete in the terms of their usage. Therefore, for me, it was important to house these two together. What if a museum became a research center, right? Or what if a research center acted as a museum? So you could have these interconnections and overlaps of conversations where a person who is affected by these events can then talk to a person who might be allied to such a cause. Therefore, forming that common ground upon which an understanding can be made. Therefore, the project also had to be something that was in the physical and social constructs of a city. These conversations become extremely important as we grow and as our cities expand. Spaces such as these provide our basic understanding of why these places become important. And what I mean by that is, maybe you would have never talked to a refugee before. Maybe we've never even come across one. But what if you do? What if you actually encounter them in a social setting? What do you even speak to them about if you don't have a common ground of understanding? Therefore, the project was to realize these interconnections and almost make it a point to have these conversations come out into the public. This project was also begun as a research or a foundational course of research into the relationship between architecture and conflict. When you have multiple situations that are affecting us as a community, our spaces which affect us on a daily basis become extremely important. And I feel like spaces such as these, which we interact with on a daily basis, should be positively reinforcing us and should be providing spaces for a positive genocidal discourse. Therefore, this project was sort of my passion project to be able to have these conversations. And this actually began also when I traveled to Sri Lanka myself, and we weren't really, if you see the tourism of the country itself, it's only situated to the southern parts of the nation, and the northern parts weren't actually something that we tapped into, which is why I feel like even to this day, we should be able to openly have these conversations in our public atmospheres. And in a way, I think this helps people come out of their shells. They also get an understanding of what our places seem like, and that makes somebody rooted and connected to the new places that they're in. Thank you.